Block 7, The Greatest Generation, Part 5, the home front of the section beginning Economic Mobilization. The United States would produce more stuff during the Second World War than it had ever before, and it would become known as the arsenal of democracy. The U.S. economy would be planned out and managed in a way that the progressives could only have dreamed about. And the reason that the economy had to be planned so centrally was just because of the vastness of the task in front of them. An army of 10 or 12 million men would have to be supplied. That food, munitions for the United States, Great Britain, Russia, all the other Allied powers would have to be created and shipped. Battleships and tanks and planes and guns and bullets and uniforms and shoes would all have to be produced for all of these things. World War II snapped the U.S. economy out of the Great Depression by 1942. That military orders alone topped $100 billion, which was a lot of money back then, by 1942. Unemployment rate plunged down, to where it was before the Great Depression began. It's difficult to get a sense of some of this stuff without looking at some pictures. These are Jeeps, just parked on the roof of a factory, waiting to be shipped out as far as the eye can see. This is an automobile plant that was transformed into a plant to make tanks. Just an assembly line of tanks going back as far as the eye can see. This is Boeing's plant in Seattle, Washington, where they are producing B-29 bombers as far as the eye can see back. As an example, this is a picture of Bethlehem Steel during World War II. Bethlehem Steel had 3 full-time shifts of 8 hours with 50,000 men working on each shift. So 150,000 people were working in Bethlehem Steel over a period of 24 hours. They would do an 8-hour shift, and then they would leave, and the next 8-hour shift would come. That when I was in Bethlehem, they said that literally the orders for steel reached from the floor to the ceiling, just paper, with orders of steel reaching 10 feet high. And that steel had to be manufactured, produced, and shipped. And of course, that created an incredible amount of jobs. Government touched the lives of Americans more than it ever had during World War II. Government touched the lives of Americans more than the New Deal ever had during World War II. There was, as we're going to see, huge new taxes, incredible new rules, regulations, boards overseeing things, planning of the economy on a scale hitherto that had not happened in the United States of America. Millions of Americans working in the defense industry. Millions of Americans joining the armed forces. The government built housing for millions of defense workers. Government even provided a measure of health care and daycare for women industrial workers. Government began paying universities to do research that the government wanted them to do. This was new. Universities had previously been almost entirely private, that government did not interfere in the life of universities. But now the government said to professors and scientists working at universities, we will give you millions upon millions of dollars to do research and things that are important for the war effort. In the war, you get the origin of what would later be called the warfare welfare state. That government would support the economy through defense spending and use all of the tax money that it took in on social programs. And that's welfare. And the reason that you have, and it's called warfare welfare, was because in order to have enough money to support welfare for people, you needed to produce enough military stuff to create enough oomph in the economy to do it. Throughout the course of the war, the total bill came to over $330 billion. And that was more than twice as much as the money that the government had spent since 1776. So 1776 to 1941 was less than half of what was spent from 1941 to 1945. That gives you a sense of just how much was being spent. The national debt skyrocketed to $259 billion in 1945, which again in 1945 was a lot of money. And the war cost $10 million an hour, again, back when $10 million an hour was a lot of money for the government to spend. Who is going to organize this monstrous effort? And this effort would be organized pretty much by one guy. Here he is. This is Henry Kaiser, who is the head of what was known as the War Production Board. And he had people working for him, but in the end, this is the guy. President Roosevelt says to him, Mr. Kaiser, he's a self-made man, a self-made millionaire, came from a little town in New York, made himself into this industrial tycoon, and Roosevelt said to him, run the American economy. And he did. Indefatigable. He worked 18-hour days, commonly, Henry Kaiser did. He earned the nickname Sir Launch-a-Lot because he launched ships, it seemed, every hour. We're going to talk about that in a moment. The board, the War Production Board, led by Kaiser, organized tens of thousands of orders, oversaw massive increases in production, oversaw changeover in American factories that turned the United States into this arsenal of democracy. The board also had sort of economic dictatorial powers. It told the big three automakers, Ford, Chrysler, and GM, no more cars. You're not allowed to make cars for the duration of the war. That's why you can't find anything like a 1943 Ford. It doesn't exist. Cars were no longer made. It imposed national speed limits to save gasoline. It set rations on rubber and gas and lots of other goods also. It created, the War Production Board established new factories, new plants, synthetic rubber, synthetic oil, in order to turn the American economy into one vast war production machine. Henry Kaiser was also famous for this is called a Liberty ship. The United States, as we saw, had to cross these two enormous oceans with all of this stuff. Henry Kaiser, he invented this ship. This was a mass-produced ship. He drew up pretty much the plans for this, him and his guys. This was a ship that, when it started out, could be built in about 2 weeks. From nothing there to a completed ship in 2 weeks. By the time they had kind of streamlined it, these Liberty ships literally could be built in 1 day. That you would roll in, at midnight on Tuesday, and there'd be no ship there. Nothing. Not even a keel, not even the bottom piece. And then 24 hours later, a completed ship would be rolling off the line. That is simply a feat of production that no other country in the world could match, let alone Germany or Japan. And the United States just started producing tens of thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of aircraft, hundreds and hundreds of ships, billions and billions of bullets, and sending them all over the world. By the end of the war, American industry produced 50% of the entire world's industrial output. Think about that for a moment. For every $2 of industrial output in 1945, one of those $2 came from the United States. All the other countries in the world, Britain, Germany, France, the Soviet Union, Japan, all of them were the other dollar. Half of the entire world's industrial production was produced by the United States. And a lot of that was thanks to Henry Kaiser and the War Production Board.